Yes. Anybody that was here last week, I apologise for the abrupt exit. My power went out in the building, but I know Laura took over from me, so that was all good. Okay, sharing screen. So here we are on the 15th. We've been through the last 2 weeks and up to our third session. And as you know, we're only kind of short on time, so we run from 12 to 12:45. So we'll be kind of going through quite expediently, I suppose. This isn't the agenda, obviously, the 1st of March. This would be for the 15th of March. But anyway, today we will have Sea Change Ambassador Claire Kane talking about her lived experience. And she can describe that in more detail in a while. And we have Mental Health First Aid Ireland Manager Donald Scanlon presenting on supportive behaviours and mental health first aid as well, which will be a great session. And then we'll just have the kind of wrap-up session, I suppose, and a small questionnaire. It's literally just like this couple of pop-up kind of questionnaire polls, basically. It's a Zoom poll. So we've had guest speakers over the last couple of weeks, and they've been fantastic. We've had Employers for Change, and we have Sea Change today in Mental Health First Aid Ireland. We have the Well Institute last week as well, and of course we've had Employability West Cork talking about their service as well. Last week the Well Institute introduced the idea that employers can integrate strategies for positive wellbeing into the workplace for sustainable wellbeing overall, and Employability West Cork delivered an overview of key financial supports available to employers in West Cork and nationally. So that was a really beneficial kind of segment, I think. We'll have a look at that again later on at the end of this session. Sea Change are there to reduce stigma associated with mental health problems, and they are challenging discrimination across the island of Ireland. They look to create an environment where people are more open and positive in their attitudes and behaviour towards mental health. I suppose you can kind of see a theme here. I suppose Ability West Cork, our programme, we really are focused on mental health, and we work with young people with mental health challenges. So this session really is quite geared towards that kind of mental health perspective, but of course it includes all disabilities. Sea Change also promote greater understanding and acceptance of and support for people with mental health problems, and they they're looking to create an environment where people with experience of mental health problems are empowered to gain equality, respect and rights as well. I think you'll find Claire's presentation very powerful, actually. Mental health first aid. I am very lucky to be an instructor for youth mental health first aid, actually. So I've worked with Donal in the past, and I have done over the last year or so. Mental health first aid, in brief, is for everyone. We all have mental health, just like we have physical health, and we could all have the ability to help someone when they may be experiencing a mental health difficulty. So mental health first aid is the help offered to someone developing a mental health problem, experiencing the worsening of an existing mental health problem, or in a mental health crisis. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, really. The first aid is given until appropriate professional support is received or until the crisis resolves. And Mental Health First Aid Ireland, importantly for this kind of section, I suppose, because this is all about employers supporting employees, offers an end-to-end solution for developing mental health first aid within your organisation or workplace. So those are the two guest speakers for today. First of all, we have Claire, who's going to chat to us all about her lived experience. We are sitting here in a kind of gallery kind of view, so I haven't got you on the big screen, Claire. I hope that's okay. So I'm going to hand over to you. If there's anybody in the meantime that has any questions or wants to raise their hand, do. But I think we'll listen to Claire there first of all. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. So I'm Claire. I'm a Sea Change Ambassador, which, as Farron explained, the organisation focuses on reducing stigma and creating an environment, whether that's in the workplace, in our social lives, in schools, of openness and understanding when it comes to mental health. And that's really important to me because I have had lived experiences with mental health difficulties for pretty much as long as I can remember. And I think, like a lot of people, it came to a head in my 20s when I went into the workplace after college. Big changes, and that can be difficult to deal with when you have different mental health difficulties. I will say this is my lived experience and my kind of opinion based on what I have gone through over the last 10 years, 11 years now, in the grown-up workplace. So that's just something to bear in mind. Everybody does have different experiences, and I think that's actually a big point that I make in this as well. So basically, this is segmented into 3 sections. The first is to not make assumptions. The second is flexibility. And the third is, what does a culture of wellness really mean? Because that's something that we hear from every employer these days. So first of all, don't make assumptions. When I started working after college, like my first full-time job, I was a year in the job and I had what I would describe as a mental breakdown. My main difficulties would be with anxiety, depression, and eating disorders over the years. And there was the lights on my brain went off. And I had an amazing experience, actually, which, even though it was 11 years ago or 10 years ago, with my boss. He was brilliant. He was so understanding. And I think that was obviously a great thing. But moving forward, I was given a false sense of security of how, at the time, a lot of employers treated people with mental health difficulties. I was given time with very few questions asked in that first job. I was told that it was up to me whether other people knew what was going on, and it felt very like I had control of the situation, which was really important at the time. But then I'd gone into other workplaces where, you know, I wasn't allowed to work from home on bad days. I felt like if I explained that I had anxiety, I was treated differently. And in 1 or 2 workplace situations I was in, it was actually exacerbated by the managers or by the bosses in the company, because their behaviour would have been quite dismissive and on one occasion aggressive. And then around grief as well comes into it. Like, everybody experiences grief in their lifetime, and I've had varying experiences of how that was managed. So anyway, the point of don't make assumptions is that everybody handles things differently. And I think what I have experienced in a lot of different workplaces is that people assume that you're not capable because you have anxiety or because you have depression. And that's just not true. Like, I managed to get through college and get a decent result of my degree with crippling depression, to the point that I can't even remember my last year of college. I've held down good jobs. I do as well as I want to in my career. I'm not a ladder climber. I like where I am now. And I have experienced that, you know, people will assume that I can't take on a certain level of responsibility because it might make me anxious, but that's my decision to make, whether I can handle something or not, or whether I want to find out if I can handle it or not. And this ties into the flexibility aspect of it as well, because everybody has a different way of dealing with things. And I know before the pandemic, before working from home, I work in an office situation, so I was able to work from home, and I still am. But before that, I would have had a lot of sick days due to anxiety because I just couldn't leave the house. I couldn't face getting on a train to go to work. I couldn't face seeing other people, couldn't face getting dressed, but I could face taking out my laptop and doing my job. But in those workplace instances, I was told that if I couldn't make it into work, I couldn't work, couldn't do any work at home. It was HR policy, or there just wasn't the facility. We didn't have laptops, or, you know, that kind of situation. And I had a lot of sick days. And ever since I've had the ability to work from home, I've had no sick days due to mental health difficulties. I've had sick days due to having the mumps and COVID, but I've had none because I couldn't leave the house, because I didn't have to. And that taught me a lot about how important flexibility is. I'm able to do my job. I'm working better than I've ever worked. I have a manager who understands that, you know, if I have a bad night's sleep with insomnia due to anxiety, I might need an extra half hour in the morning to get ready for our first call, you know, and that is really important. And I think that kind of reasonable accommodation has to be applied to people, because if you're dismissing people and making assumptions about what they can and can't do and not affording them the flexibility to, you know, fit things in around how they're feeling that day, then you're going to miss out on a huge talent pool of amazing people, creative people, hard workers, and some of the most focused people that you'll find out there, just because of one assumption and an inability to adapt. Because I think a lot of that kind of approach to, you know, no, you can't, if you can't come in, you can't work, is a very kind of old school approach. And it's good to see that a lot of companies are moving forward, but from what I've seen, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. And then that kind of goes into as well, what does a culture of wellness really mean? I worked for a workplace wellbeing company. I won't mention their name, but I'm sure if you Google me, you'll be able to find it. And they had a brilliant kind of social approach. They valued the work that we did, and they obviously provided packages to companies to look after their well-being. But what I will say is just having those packages isn't enough. And I've heard a lot of stories through my work about, you know, yes, this is brilliant. We have our pancake days, we have our cultural days where we celebrate, you know, diversity and all of this kind of thing. But there might still be, you know, that one person who's stressed because they know that if their child is sick in school, they can't leave. Or they'll get reprimanded if they do leave, or they have to take a half day's holiday to go and pick their kid up from school. And that's where it kind of goes into, you know, it's not just about people who are currently suffering with mental health difficulties. It goes into preventing other people from experiencing depression and anxiety due to the workload that's put into them or due to the culture that's there. And I really think a lot of that comes down to training and understanding of the differences between various mental health difficulties and illnesses that are out there. You know, we're really good at talking about anxiety and depression, but we don't talk a lot about bipolar or even like neurodiversity, like how ADHD can affect someone's mental health and their ability to work. And I think that's really important too. So a lot of education is needed among employers as well as employees to create that kind of safer environment for someone who does struggle with their mental health. And as well as that, when we're talking about a culture of wellness, we focus an awful lot on food and movement and fitness. And as I said, I have had experience with eating disorders, and I would really like to see a future where employers are more mindful of that, because yeah, of course, we all need to eat healthy and we all need to move a little, but a hyper focus on that as the marker for whether you're healthy or not can actually be really triggering for a lot of people. And it can make your anxiety, like I've had incidences where like I just didn't want to go into work that day because everybody was going to be talking about like did they reach their 10,000 miles mark in the challenge that month, and I just couldn't talk about that kind of thing because it would get into my head. So yeah, basically those talks and activities are great, but there has to be more of a mindfulness behind it, and think about, you know, not everybody, we have quite a high percentage of people who have eating disorders and other mental health difficulties in this country, and we need to think a little bit more about how we're affecting them by making that physical health the marker of health. And going back to the don't make assumptions, again, you can't assume that everybody is okay with it. So I think that's basically me. I don't know if anybody has any questions or anything. No.
That's really fantastic. I have to say, you really brought a lot of pieces together there that we were kind of missing, I suppose. You know, I think particularly that focus around mental health the eating disorders as well, absolutely is, it's just, you know, I suppose it's very topical as well at the moment. It's in the news a lot, you know, there's a lot talked about there as well. And I know in mental health, youth mental health first aid training, there's discussion around it as well, you know, so there's a lot there, and it's something that possibly will, I mean, I would imagine in workplaces, it's not something that's really kind of talked about or thought about maybe. And as you were saying there, Claire, you know, those kind of days where there might be the 10,000 step challenge, and I suppose we saw over COVID particularly, there was a lot of the kind of 5K, couch to 5K, all of those kind of different drives, which yes, absolutely, you know, healthy, fit bodies, grand. But, you know, when somebody is struggling in that kind of area, it can be so damaging and impactful on a person's life, as you so succinctly said, actually. Thanks for sharing all of that. It's really powerful. And I think it's so important for people to kind of get a feel for the lived experience. And we all have our own experience here in this room. You know, we all have different experiences of mental health, whether it's impacted us personally or in a family sense, or, you know, in those kind of different ways. But I really like that kind of whole kind of position you take about, you know, reasonable accommodations really enabling you to go to work, to be a fully productive person in your workplace, whether it's at home or whether it's in the workplace, you know, to have those supports. Would you say that's one of the kind of, is that kind of a key part there for you that employers could be looking at, that kind of work from home or those kind of accommodations?
Definitely. I know, like, there are a lot of people that don't have that luxury really to work from home. And I know a lot of people don't see it as a luxury because they don't have that kind of, that fear that stops them from leaving the house sometimes. But I have learned so much over the last 2 years about the things that were triggering me and my anxiety previously. And having that, like that, the big difference in my sick days due to my mental health is a huge thing. And that doesn't mean that I haven't had bad days. I've had plenty of them, just like we all have over the last 2 years. But I'm in an environment that I feel safer in, and, you know, I can work in my favorite horrible hoodie that makes me feel comfortable and safe. And I don't have to think about how I look or anything when I'm at home. And that accommodation means a lot to me. And like a lot of people, I was anxious about the idea of going back, but my managers understand.
I think it's very important, and particularly now, as you say, we're coming out of the kind of the pandemic times and everyone's going back into the office, or, you know, and those kind of potentials there for some of the workforce anyway. I suppose, as you said, not everybody can work from home depending on the kind of services they're working in, but I suppose it's even in those situations, it's just to be mindful that there could be a reasonable accommodation that could be come to. Do you know what I mean? If there is somebody that is in need, you know, and if it's the difference between having somebody able to participate in the workforce or not because of a slight change in the kind of organizational kind of outlook or culture, I suppose, then we should be looking at them. And yeah, and something you said there as well really reflects back to Valerie last week. She was the Well Institute. She discussed kind of well-being in the workplace, I suppose, and, you know, how it's the kind of responsibility of employers and employees, you know, that collaboration piece. But the interesting part to that was the package, the kind of well-being package, and how they don't necessarily work per se. You know, it's an ongoing discussion, I suppose, to ensure, and that check-in piece, constantly ensuring that the employee and the employer are kind of catered for, I suppose. Yeah, so the well-being packages are good, but they can't be tokenistic, I suppose, is the thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, they are important, and they are a wonderful benefit, and people learn a lot from them. But those programs aren't the culture. That program has to fit into a culture that has that flexibility and openness.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Claire. Has anybody got any questions for Claire before we move on to Donal? No, I love putting people on the spot. That's fine. Thanks so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Claire? Or
no, just thank you.
I'd like to add something. Happy birthday. It's Claire's birthday today. She came and delivered on her birthday.
Happy birthday, Claire.
And I know that she's going to go and do something nice after this session is finished. So thanks so much for taking the time out, though. Really.
Thank you.
Thanks a million. And so with that fantastic kind of discussion, we'll move over to Donal, who's also going to be talking about mental health first aid He is the manager of Mental Health First Aid Ireland. So I'll pass over to you, Donald.
Thanks very much, Fern. I might just share a screen here if that's all right.
Yep. Shall I might make
Yeah, you might have to just enable share screen sharing there. Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Well, nice to see everybody and nice to see people's faces, isn't it? I've had a couple of in-person meetings even over the last few months, or last few weeks, I should say, which has been great. So it's nice to but still lovely to see people's faces. So thanks for being here, and thanks to Claire on her birthday. That's amazing. I feel almost sorry that she has to listen to me now for her birthday. But yeah, my name is Donald Scanlon. I'm manager of Mental Health First Aid Ireland. I'm a mental health professional in my background. If any of you have ever heard me speak before, I'm going to apologise now because I generally use all the same old jokes at every talk I do nearly. My dad jokes, as my kids call them. My background is in mental health nursing. I'm a health promotion nurse specialist and have been also in a past life a clinical nurse specialist in addictions as well. But mostly what I've done for the last 6 or 7 years has been managing Mental Health First Aid Ireland since its inception here in Ireland. And I'll tell you more about it. I suppose I hope I got my remit right here, Fern, but I mean, basically what I've tried to do is try and give you, in one way, a bit of a business case as to why something like mental health first aid is important and how it can make a little bit of a difference. And with the direction of brevity that Fern indicated at the start, I'll try and keep myself to a few slides. I'm a dad, I'm a son, I'm an employer, and I'm an employee because I have a board that I'm accountable to as well. And I always like to start by saying I have mental health, the same way Claire kind of described that, that we all have mental health, and Fern mentioned it as well. And I think just without calling your names and without saying anything bad things about you have mental health too. So let's just keep that in mind. I generally, everywhere I go, try and ask people the same thing, to try and understand when we say the phrase mental health, what sort of things come to mind. And very often it's more of an illness model that we tend to come up with. It'll be something like depression or anxiety or schizophrenia or illness or something wrong. We're broken, we're damaged, we're less than. When actually, if I say the phrase physical health to you, we tend to think, positive. We tend to think, oh, I've got to eat right. I've got to go to that wellness activity. I've got to do that yoga session. And we generally think about it positively, or else we think about it negatively, but because it's something we're not achieving, we haven't gotten there yet, but we will eventually. I must go for that walk. I'm always saying I should. But actually, the same way we all have physical health, we all have mental health as well. Because mental health is about how you think about yourself and how you feel about yourself. It's not just about illness. It's about those thinking and feeling moments that we have every single day and how that makes an impact on I suppose dictates how we make the most of that day, that moment, that stage of our life in general. How we reach our potential is often dictated by our thoughts and our feelings. You're all thinking and feeling human beings, yes? Yeah, nod, please tell me you are. Yeah, good. Okay, which means you're all going to have, like Claire said, a potential of something like a grief issue, a loss, a pressure, a strain, a difficulty. We all have the potential for those thoughts and feelings to become, predominantly negative for a period of time, maybe. And that's maybe when we get into the area of it being a diagnosable illness, where I suppose that those thoughts and feelings disrupt a person's ability to be able to engage in their daily activities, to be able to carry out their, whether it's study or work, to self-care. Maybe it'll affect their decisions in relation to self-care, and it may even affect their ability to engage in satisfying relationships. So our relationships with others, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, our ability to engage with our colleagues, our boss, our team, often dictated by how we are thinking and feeling on any given day or moment. Okay. Now, when it becomes problematic, this is when we get into the area of mental health problems. And this is where we get into the kind of statistics that a lot of you will have heard before, with things like, 1 in 5 or half the population in their lifetime. And as I like to say to people, well, actually, yes, it might be 1 in 5 of people who get diagnosed, but what about all those out there that never got diagnosed in any given year? If you're like me, I did get diagnosed with an anxiety problem, but it was only about 12 months ago. And yet I will have been experiencing it for the majority of my life, including a couple of bouts of depression as well, that I never got to see a doctor, where it never got recorded and therefore never got counted. Now, what about all those people out there, like yourselves, probably experiencing difficulty and yet never having either received help or even maybe never even sought that help? So I'm not a big believer in the statistics around this. I think it's not just a 1 in 5 or a half the population piece. It's a whole human experience piece. It's every single one of us at some point will experience a problem. And I think from an employer's perspective, we maybe need to see that it has, there are impacts when people have mental health difficulties, which are going to be a part of every single one of our lives. And therefore it is going to affect the role that we encompass, the jobs that we do and how we do them, because very often the kind of how mental health problems manifest in workplaces will be things like difficulties concentrating, difficulties engaging in multiple tasks, taking longer to do tasks, maybe difficulty making decisions, having difficulty juggling number of tasks, and kind of things like our relationships with others, are being less patient with our colleagues, our friends, or our clients, right? Very importantly. There's a cost attached to that. There's a huge, and not to make it about money, by the way, it's not. I'm forever trying to make this argument to boards of directors and CEOs and stuff when I meet them for workplace training. I'll talk to them about the kind of ethical and moral obligation they almost have to want to make a change. But often the thing that affects them sometimes is the bottom line piece, when they realize there's an actual cost. Now, I'm not saying it's all about the money, it's not, but whatever motivates you, I think. And so what are the costs around, mental health difficulties in the world and in Ireland, let's say particularly? So about 1 in 6 workers will experience stress, depression, or anxiety at any one time. So that's a lot of people experiencing difficulties, and they're just the ones that we're able to record, all right? Never mind the ones who, again, don't get counted. A quarter of employees have considered resigning due to stress. Now, we know there's a huge cost in relation to turnover as well. So there's huge costs attached to that. And a further 1 in 10 have done so. They've actually left the job because of stress, all right? Deloitte, you may be familiar with with organizations like Deloitte or PwC, and a lot of them have done kind of this management consultancy piece, have done reviews on the actual costs around this. And Deloitte estimate that mental health problems cost employers in the UK anyway, about 45 billion a year. That's just employers. Now in Ireland, in Irish society as a whole, mental health problems are estimated to cost 8.2 billion, all right, which is about 6% of GDP. So it's a significant amount of money that is costing the Irish society when with mental health difficulties. And again, this is just the stuff that's being recorded. Now, a lot of workplace costs are related to 3 main factors. They're related to turnover. So that's the idea of people leaving a job and then having to be, new people having to be hired, trained, and there's a huge cost involved in that, all right? So of that 45 billion, estimated about kind of 10% of that, maybe 10 to 20% of that is in relation to turnover. Another 10 to 20% of it is in relation to absence rates. So absenteeism, you would think that would actually be higher. But the huge cost, the really big cost to employers is this concept of presenteeism. This idea of being in work and yet not really being in work, and that we're not being as productive as we could be because we're having a problem with our mental health or well-being. So there's a huge cost involved in that. Now, the World Health Organization would say that we kind of define like a healthy workplace as one where employees and managers work together to protect and promote their health, safety, and well-being and the sustainability of business. All right. So there's the World Health Organization giving you a reason why, and defining what a healthy workplace is. But again, that bottom line piece, what is why should they, why should we invest and why should we value mental health in our workplaces? Well, yes, it can make people be more productive. I'll often ask CEOs, what's your biggest investment? What do you invest in the most? And what do you value the most, I should say. Sorry, they'll ask, what's the most important asset first? And they'll go, oh, our employees, our workforce. Okay, great. Show me your books. What do you mean? Show me your books. Show me where you invest in that asset that you're talking about. And they go, oh, and they hum and they haw because they actually don't put, percentage-wise, a huge amount of money into investing money in their employees. And yet there's a huge return on investment. Again, Deloitte, PwC, they estimate that for approximately every euro invested, employers can actually see a return on investment of about €5, right? And that's after the costs are taken out. So that's a huge amount of return just for investing in mental health and well-being, all right? Now, I'm actually, that's just in relation to mental health, actually. So that return, again, is seen in reductions in absenteeism, increased productivity, so reductions in presenteeism, and reductions in staff turnover. Like Claire mentioned, if you have somebody who responds, an employer that responds to your needs, your individualized needs, not just the global, wellness session or yoga session that they offer, but actually responds to individual needs and has managers that are able to respond to that, you're more likely to hold on to that staff member, more likely that they're going to be more productive and they're going to be more engaged and more satisfied. All right, much more productive ultimately. That return, there was much higher return on investment, by the way, when that investment focused on early intervention, education, and culture change. So where does mental health first aid sit in that? Well, Fern almost is one of our best advocates, so I appreciate what she was telling already. What is mental health first aid and what we are? So by the way, just to say, okay, so Mental Health First Aid Ireland are the only licensed provider of mental health first aid in Ireland. So when you think about mental health first aid, we're the only people who are legally able to deliver that in Ireland. And we have a youth mental health first aid program that Fern is an instructor in, which is for adults supporting young people. We have workplace-based interventions, and we have an adult program that we run to the public as well through our through HSE funding and through various charity and voluntary sector groups that we work with. Not only do we train people directly, but we have embedded instructors in different locations, like for delivering in the community. The idea of mental health first aid, it is the help offered to somebody who's experiencing a mental health difficulty, maybe a worsening of an existing mental health problem, somebody who is experiencing a crisis in their mental health, and that help is offered or is given until effective help has been received or until the crisis resolves. So it's about that same principle of physical first aid. How do I recognize a problem in somebody, and how do I, effectively and in an evidence-based way offer support? Now, we mentioned that, I would say, well, why mental health first aid as opposed to any other kind of piece of cultural change in relation to mental health or some mental health supports. And we're just a part of the jigsaw very often, okay? However, a big part of what mental health first aid is about is that early intervention and education piece that I mentioned. And the evidence is saying that you invest in early intervention, invest in education, and invest in changing culture. So the attitudes, the beliefs of the people on your workforce, and how they treat each other, more supportive behaviors, more likely to offer support after they've done training on this. Early intervention is about preventing things from becoming any worse. It's about reducing secondary effects such as mental health, other mental health problems, other physical health problems. We're going to have much better educational outcomes, much better occupational outcomes, financial, all from intervening and supporting earlier. We know this to be true. It's logical. We apply it to physical health all the time. Early intervention, screening services, from everything from heart disease to cancer. We need to apply the same logic. And it is just that logic. The amount of people that tell me, oh my God, I hadn't heard about mental health first aid before. It seems like such a no-brainer, such a logical idea. We should all have some of these skills to have better conversations about mental health, but more likelihood that we'll offer support, and support from family, friends, and work colleagues can make a huge difference in whether or not somebody accesses help and whether or not somebody even gets the help they need, even if they know they should get it, by the way. I'll give you a personal example of that. I took a career break last year. I was, Fern will know this, I took a little step away from mental health first aid just for 12 months, and I was working in the private sector. I was working in one of these big corporate environments, that Claire referenced almost, and I started to experience significantly bad anxiety issues, and nobody knew. I couldn't tell anybody about it. I was at a very senior manager level, and there was the director of HR for Ireland, and then there was me. you know, so, and I didn't even, and I suppose I couldn't even take that day off. I was working from home. It wasn't any easier on me, actually. If anything, it was worse. Again, every individual is going to be different. And yet I couldn't tell anybody, or I didn't tell anybody. I felt I couldn't tell anybody. That stigma piece that Claire is there to represent earlier on is about people's attitudes and beliefs, and even my own internal attitudes, even though I knew better. I know I should reach out. It's good to talk, isn't it? And yet, when you're in the middle of a problem, sometimes, even though you know that talking to somebody, reaching out for supports, taking personal responsibility for my own well-being and mental health, talking to a professional, all these things I knew would help, I still didn't do it, because when you're in the middle of it, those supports seem just that little bit out of reach. And what you might need is someone to come along and sort of say to you, you know, has this ever happened to you before? What worked for you in the past? Could you maybe reach out to that person or to that service or support? Plant a seed to make me think, could I do something for myself? And ultimately, somebody did do that eventually. But in the meantime, my productivity suffered, and my enjoyment and satisfaction at even being in the workplace suffered. In a culture that was very busy, very always on, very never switch off the email or the phone, and yet a lot of wellness activities that were going on, a lot of very proactive interventions for well-being, and some amazing people that I worked alongside who were huge mental health advocates, and yet I still hid it from them. Now, I nearly guarantee you that if I'd have said it to them, they'd have been very supportive, but my own hesitancy, my own fear got in the way and stopped me from offering help, from looking for help. Mental health first aid gives people who maybe could have supported me in that the skills to improve things like their mental health literacy. So this is the knowledge, the understanding that surrounds mental health, and the specific knowledge about how to offer mental health first aid interventions, the communication framework that's threaded throughout our training. It improves attitudes and to appropriate treatments. It reduces and stigmatizing attitudes, so it changes culture ultimately, or at least that's if you can apply things like knowledge, attitudes, behaviors to what culture could be. And it creates more supportive behaviors. People who undergo this training are more likely to offer help and support to somebody who's experiencing a mental health difficulty. And while it's not a well-being initiative itself, it's not about the participants' own mental health. When it has been measured, very briefly, but when it has been measured, it has been shown to be effective at improving the participants' own mental health as well. We've used it in lots of different work environments for things like mandatory training for various different groups, including line manager training, certain target groups. Mostly it's voluntary participation, so people signing up and saying, look, I want to know more. Yes, employers and employees can take part in things like, you know, well-being ambassadors, mental health champions, and what they need sometimes is a piece of robust evidence-based knowledge like mental health first aid, as a piece of training that underpins those efforts that they want to make themselves. We don't come in and try and do it for them, but we want to support them in the changes that they want to make. And we've done that alongside some of the biggest corporate, workplaces around Ireland and in the UK. And here's some of the examples of some of the companies that we've worked with already. We deliver mental health first aid training in the public service to the Gardaí, the Defence Forces, within the HSE, but also to the private sector, to an awful lot of companies that you might recognise here. Voluntary and charity sector groups as well. We deliver it to youth groups throughout Ireland. We deliver it to homeless charities and communities where we can. And we're always looking to grow the number of people that are interested. It's all about impact. And for us, and just I'll leave this up on the screen as some of the quotes that we had a few people on screen so you can read yourself, but mental health first aid started about 6 or 7 years ago now. And we started off year one training about 150, 160 people in year one. 6, 7 years later, we're now over 13,500 people in Ireland that have been trained in mental health first aid. And that's a small drop in the ocean in comparison to the 4 million people around the world that have been trained in the 23, maybe 24 countries around the world where licensed mental health first aid training exists. We I suppose I am very proud of mental health first aid training and all the instructors that are out there delivering it, because most of them carry this incredible passion for mental health and supportive behaviors and encouraging that. And you know what? Workplaces are one place where Irish society spends an awful lot of our time. And I always say, you've got to meet people where they're at. You meet students in school, you meet parents and youth workers in the youth organizations that they work with, and you meet adults, mostly, thankfully, in their workplaces. So we have to continue to support those adults to be better human beings in their workplaces, but also to be better members of society. And that's where mental health first aid's goal is to try and have an impact on the wider area of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donald. That was really, even though I am an instructor and I know about mental health first aid, it's always really good to see the kind of employer aspect as well, you know, that kind of corporate kind of position as well. And yeah, I can absolutely say I'm a fine advocate for the training as well, being an instructor. But I actually first took part in a mental health first aid training nearly 4 years ago. That was my first experience of it. I actually heard about it when I was in college many years ago, when it was still based in Australia. But yeah, no, fantastic. And thanks a million. I think people are saying thanks for sharing your personal experience as well. I always find that really powerful. We actually at Ability West Cork, we have a couple of training courses that will be coming up soon that will be fully funded by the HSE. So that just keep an eye out on our social media for those pieces there as well. That's youth mental health first aid training. As Donald said, he delivers the adult mental health first aid training in workplaces and into the community. So always worth a follow. We'll be sending out all the links for the different organisations after these sessions are complete. But yeah, no, thanks so much. Has anyone got any brief questions for Donald? Or you can direct them into the chat there if not. Thanks, Donald. I'm just going to throw up a couple of quick slides to finish off, just to wrap up our 3 sessions. So bear with me there now. I've actually called it final wrap as well. I think that's kind of, sounds kind of good. Where will it stay from the beginning? No. Okay, so here we are. I'm just going to quickly go through each different kind of guest speaker that we've had. So just to kind of recap, really, Employers for Change were our first guest speakers. Claire Hayes, she discussed language around disability, reasonable accommodations and disclosures, and they've been kind of a theme all the way through the 3 weeks. She also mentioned that 1 in 7 people in Ireland are living with a disability. That's 13.5% of the overall population. The reasonable accommodations, you know, this is something that helps to alleviate a substantial disadvantage due to an impairment or medical condition, and reasonable accommodations often have low or no cost. Claire actually discussed some of those reasonable accommodations. They're in the previous video, which I'll share out as well. Disclosures were also discussed, and this is kind of all, actually the language around disclosure is even changing. So language is ever evolving. That's something that we always have to remember. But basically, this is making a disability known or sharing a hidden disability with your employer. Once the employer is aware of the disability, they can ensure that the required supports and accommodations are available and that they can comply with their responsibilities under equality and health and safety legislation, which is always important. Employability West Cork, who delivered the 2 sessions there over the first 2 sessions through 2 webinars. The first session kind of discussed the overview of their service in West Cork, and of course there are other employability services around Ireland as well, so it's a national service. Discussed financial supports, employability, work with people who have an illness, health condition or a disability who want to get a job or return to work. And more importantly for this session, they support employers by building relationships so that they can really understand the nature of their business and what they need from their staff. And they have this continued support for the candidate and the employer, so the person who's going into the job, the employee and the employer, so that they can ensure the best possible chance of success. I think something that employers are really interested in are the kind of financial supports that may be available to them. So this kind of the second session discussed grants, and these grants include all of these here. Actually, there's quite a substantial list: employability workplace program, workplace placement experience program, wage subsidy scheme, Jobs Plus, and there's different grants there like the workplace adaptation grant, job interview interpreter grant, and employee retention grant. So yeah, so those kind of, you can find all details about those financial supports on employability websites or on the Department of Social Protection websites as well. The Well Institute last week, that was Valerie, she discussed the, she kind of introduced the idea that employers can integrate strategies for positive well-being into the workplace for sustainable well-being. And I suppose this kind of touches on the two discussions today by Claire and Donal as well. You know, it's not about the kind of quick bang for your buck, I suppose. It's more about that kind of sustainable piece, you know, implementing change, cultural change over a period of time. And this whole idea of how maintaining positive well-being is an integrated process. She normalized some simple strategies that become part of the working environment and how this can have a greater impact, even down to adjusting your own body and the feeling in your own body when you're becoming stressed, I suppose, throughout the day. And she discussed how employers and employees can work together for sustainable well-being in the workplace. Sea Change today, Claire, fantastic, our Sea Change ambassador, talking about her experiences with mental health and the impact that this had on her work, discussed just how powerful reasonable accommodations could be, allowing Claire to work from home while she experienced severe anxiety. I hope I'm right in saying, wording it like that, ensured that Claire was able to continue to work and not miss days. Again, Donal mentioned that that wasn't the best fit for him. So again, it's an individual approach for each person. This also meant that she was still a productive and participating, I think the participating piece is most important, member of the workforce. And for employers to create, sorry, I have to move people around because I can't see it. For employers to create supportive work environments in the workplaces, it's important to hear these levels of experiences. I think you can all agree, actually, from the two speakers today, how powerful it is. Employers are more likely to retain employees and increase productivity if they adopt these kind of inclusive strategies, not in a tokenistic sense, but actually with real, genuine interest in supporting employees. And Donal, manager of Mental Health First Aid Ireland, just discussed supportive behaviours in the workplace and how mental health first aid can benefit the entire work ecosystem. As Donal mentioned, mental health first aid is given until appropriate professional support is received or until the crisis is resolved. So I suppose if you're thinking about physical first aid, you can start to think in terms of along the same lines, but it's mental health first aid. You know, as a participant of mental health first aid training, you learn a framework for communication, how to offer and provide initial help, and how to guide a person towards appropriate treatments and other supportive help. You're not there to diagnose, you're there to kind of recognize maybe signs and symptoms and gain confidence, I think, is one of the biggest things. Gain confidence in, you know, understanding whether, you know, reflecting upon whether you're the right person to approach somebody, can you approach somebody, and knowing the tools with which, how to approach somebody, I suppose, and what to do. Mental health first aid training has been shown to improve attitudes towards people with mental health difficulties, reducing stigma, which is that massive piece. Sea Change is all about reducing stigma. I think we're all here. I think part of the reason we put together this series of webinars is because we're all here to reduce stigma, whether it's in mental health or other disabilities. Improving knowledge is power, and to improve people's confidence in providing help, and the likelihood to advise people to kind of seek professional help, you know, not to take the fear out of supporting people to seek professional help, I suppose. Taking the fear out and growing in confidence, I think, really is that kind of underpinning of the mental health first aid. So yes, so there we are. We kind of reached the end of our 3 sessions. Just as it says here, we were delighted. Ability West Cork and Employability West Cork were very happy to put these 3 sessions on. Massive thanks to all of the guest speakers. You've all been amazing. I will be sending out slide decks and recordings after these sessions, once I've collated them all. And thanks for attending. So before everybody runs away, I'm going to stop sharing. As we always have at the end of these sessions, just for evaluation purposes, we're going to pop up a quick poll. It's only two questions. Anyone who's co-host don't mess around with the screen because it ends up messing up with this. So there's 2 questions there. You can just, it's a multiple choice questionnaire. So if you wouldn't mind just answering those couple of questions, would be delighted. And it means that we can kind of really see and evaluate to see whether we've kind of answered questions, I suppose. You know, has it been useful? All of those kind of different things. We've really enjoyed putting these sessions on, I have to say. If there's any questions before we head off into the distance, I'm sorry, I realised I've kept you 6 minutes later than you're supposed to be. It's because the discussions have been great. Pretty much everybody's voted. Okay, I'm ending this poll. Cool. Thank you very much for answering that. So any questions at all, you can direct to myself or any of the team in ability at wcdp.ie or Michal in employability. Again, this session is recorded, so it will be popped up on YouTube shortly once I've done a bit of jiggery pokery with it, made it viewable. And yeah, so any questions at all, you can just drop us an email. Okay, thanks very much for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, William. Bye-bye. Oh, I forgot it was Patrick's weekend soon.